It was a Tuesday evening like any other. The smell of freshly cooked spaghetti filled the kitchen, a modest yet cozy space with cream-colored walls and a small round table that Megan and I had sat at countless times. Outside, the last hues of sunset painted our quiet suburban street in shades of orange and pink. Everything felt normal, predictable, until Megan shattered that illusion with 7 words. "Have you ever thought about an open marriage?" I froze, the fork full of pasta midway to my mouth. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Surely, she didn't just suggest that. Megan had always been the steady one, the grounded half of our marriage. Over 12 years together, she was the woman who left little love notes in my lunch bag and texted me "I miss you" out of the blue. The idea of her saying something so outrageous was like seeing a glitch in the universe. "What?" I managed to croak, my voice shaky as my stomach churned. "You know," she said casually, her eyes fixed on her plate as if she were merely discussing a new paint color for the living room. Like some couples do. They still love each other but explore things with other people. "It's just an idea I've been thinking about." I set my fork down, appetite gone, as a cold knot formed in my chest. Megan's tone was calm, almost too calm, and that unnerved me. "You're serious?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She shrugged, still avoiding eye contact. "It's not like I'm saying we have to do it. I just thought we could talk about it. You know, see how you feel." How I feel? I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. We had shared everything. Our hopes, fears, dreams. For over a decade, I believed we were solid, a team. And now, out of nowhere, she was floating the idea of bringing other people into our marriage like it was a new hobby she wanted to try. "What made you even think about this?" I pressed, leaning forward as I searched her face for answers. She finally looked up, her blue eyes meeting mine with a mix of hesitation and determination. "Some of my friends have been talking about it," she admitted. "Jenny and Lisa, mostly. They said it's not as taboo as people think. And it got me wondering if, I don't know, maybe it could work for us. We've been together a long time, Jack. Maybe it would keep things exciting." The word exciting hit me like a slap. Exciting? Had she really grown so bored of the life we'd built together? A comfortable home in the suburbs, shared road trips in our Subaru Outback, Sunday barbecues with friends and neighbors. Was all of that not enough for her anymore? "Are you unhappy?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," she said quickly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "It's not that. I love you, Jack. I really do. I just thought, maybe this could be something new. Something different." Her words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. Different. That one word was enough to make my stomach twist with unease. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to say much more. "I'll think about it." Megan offered a small, relieved smile, as if she'd just offloaded a heavy burden. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she added, her tone almost cheerful. "I just wanted to bring it up." But the damage was already done. The mere fact that she had even considered this, let alone voiced it, cracked the foundation of our marriage. It made me question everything: her loyalty, her love, and even the memories we'd built together. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Megan chatted about her day, the same way she always did, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. That night, I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling as Megan slept peacefully beside me. Her breathing was steady, her face serene, but my mind was a storm of questions and doubts. Was this truly just an idea she had picked up from her friends, or was there more to it? Was she already thinking about someone else? For the first time in 12 years, I felt like I didn't know my wife at all. The days following Megan's proposal felt like I was walking through a fog. Every interaction, every word she said, carried an invisible weight. While she acted like everything was normal, I found myself scrutinizing every detail, every subtle shift in her tone or glance. It wasn't like Megan to be this distant. In the years we'd been together, she was always upfront about her feelings, often to the point of over-communicating. If she was upset, I'd hear about it. If she was thrilled, the house would hum with her energy. But now, there was something off. I started noticing the small things first. Her phone, which used to sit forgotten on the counter, was suddenly always with her. Late at night, I'd hear it buzz softly while she sat curled up on the couch. If I asked who it was, she'd flash me a quick smile and say, "Oh, just Jenny being Jenny." Normally, I would have shrugged it off. Jenny was her best friend, and they talked often. But now, every buzz, every late-night text felt suspicious. Was it Jenny? Or was it someone else? Then there was the way she spent her time. Megan had always been a creature of habit. Spin class on Mondays, book club on Thursdays, and weekends spent binge-watching shows on Netflix with me. But lately, she'd been busier than usual. Errands, she'd say. Or, Lisa needs me to help with something. One Saturday afternoon, she left the house with her laptop and a notebook, claiming she was meeting Jenny to plan some event. I nodded, pretending I didn't notice the way she'd lingered in front of the mirror that morning, carefully applying makeup that seemed too much for a casual coffee meetup. As the door closed behind her, a gnawing suspicion took hold. What if she wasn't with Jenny? What if there was someone else? I tried to push the thought away. Megan wasn't that person. She was loyal, devoted, a stickler for honesty. And yet, her suggestion of an open marriage played on a loop in my head. It didn't just come out of nowhere. She had been thinking about it, planning it. One evening, after she'd gone to bed early, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at her laptop. She'd left it on the coffee table, its lid closed, as if it were daring me to open it. My heart pounded as I debated what to do. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the jealous husband who snooped through his wife's things. Megan and I had always trusted each other. That was the cornerstone of our marriage, or so I thought. But now, that trust felt like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. I sat down and opened the laptop. It was password protected, of course. My first thought was to give up, but then it hit me. Megan's passwords were always tied to important dates. I tried our wedding anniversary. Nothing. Then her birthday. Still no luck. Finally, I entered the date we moved into our house, and the screen unlocked. The guilt hit me instantly, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I hesitated, staring at the familiar desktop wallpaper, a photo of us from our last trip to the Grand Canyon. Megan's bright smile, her arm around my shoulder, mocked me. What was I doing? But I couldn't stop. I clicked on her browser history, my hands trembling. Most of it was ordinary, shopping sites, articles about work, recipes. But then I noticed a few visits to a forum I didn't recognize. I clicked the link, and my stomach twisted. It was a discussion board about open marriages and polyamorous relationships. The topics ranged from how to approach your partner to balancing multiple relationships. Some of the posts had comments from an anonymous account. I scrolled through, my eyes scanning for any sign it might be Megan. And there it was. The username wasn't one I recognized, but the writing. The writing was undeniably hers. The way she phrased things, her tone, it was Megan. She'd been asking for advice about how to approach a traditional spouse who might not be open to the idea. She even described our marriage in unsettling detail, noting how stable and comfortable we were, but that she wanted more excitement. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't just some passing thought she'd had. Megan had been planning this for months, quietly gathering information and preparing for the conversation. I closed the laptop and sat back, my heart pounding. The walls of our living room felt like they were closing in. Megan had always been an open book, or so I thought. But now, it was clear she'd been keeping a part of herself hidden from me, a part that longed for something I wasn't enough to provide. Over the next few days, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was genuine or a mask to cover her secrets. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a pang of jealousy and dread. "Megan," I said one night as we sat on the couch, the glow of the TV illuminating her face. "Are you happy? Like, really happy?" She looked at me, surprised by the question. "Of course I am," she said, her voice soft. "Why would you ask that?" I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just been thinking about us, that's all." Her smile was reassuring, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're fine, Jack." "Really?" But I didn't feel fine. The doubts were growing, creeping into every corner of my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. And I knew it was only a matter of time before they consumed me completely. By the time Megan left for another one of her so-called girls' nights on a Thursday evening, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Her suggestion of an open marriage still hung in the air, unspoken but ever-present, casting a shadow over every interaction. That night, I sat on the couch, watching her prepare to leave. She was dressed casually, dark jeans, a soft cream sweater, but she had spent extra time in front of the mirror, perfecting her makeup. I couldn't help but wonder, did she do this for Jenny and Lisa? Or was there someone else waiting for her? "You look nice," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She smiled at me over her shoulder. "Thanks, babe. Don't wait up, okay? We might be out late." I nodded, watching her pick up her purse and phone. She glanced at her watch, then kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door. The sound of her car starting up in the driveway sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to distract myself with the game on TV, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Was she really with Jenny and Lisa? Or was this another carefully constructed lie? The question ate at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, got into my old Subaru Outback, and started the engine. It was an impulsive decision, the kind I would have never made before. But this wasn't the life I'd known. Megan had introduced a doubt so insidious that it had taken root and grown into something I couldn't ignore. I kept my distance as I followed her car, making sure to stay several vehicles behind. She drove toward downtown, the city lights glowing in the distance. I expected her to take the exit that led to Jenny's house, but she didn't. Instead, she turned onto a street lined with trendy restaurants and bars. My stomach tightened as she pulled into the parking lot of a sleek, upscale restaurant. It wasn't the kind of place Megan would go with her friends. It was the kind of place we used to visit on date nights. I parked 2 rows behind her, my heart pounding as I watched her get out of the car. She glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, then walked briskly toward the entrance. Her heels clicked against the pavement, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet lot. For a moment, I sat frozen in my car, debating what to do. Every fiber of my being wanted to march in there and confront her, but I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to know the truth. I got out of the car and followed her inside, keeping my head down as I entered the dimly lit restaurant. The smell of grilled steak and expensive wine hit me immediately, a sensory overload that only heightened my nerves. I spotted Megan almost instantly. She was sitting in a booth near the back, her posture relaxed, her expression warm and animated. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize, a tall, clean-cut guy in a navy blazer, his hair perfectly styled. He leaned forward as he spoke, his hand resting just inches from hers on the table. My chest tightened as I watched them. This wasn't just a casual dinner. There was a familiarity in the way they interacted, the way Megan laughed at something he said, her hand briefly brushing his. It was a level of comfort that made my stomach turn. I slipped back outside before she could see me, my mind racing. Megan wasn't just talking about an open marriage. She was already living it. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of my lungs. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the dashboard. The woman I had spent 12 years building a life with was meeting another man in secret, and I had been blind to it. Or maybe I had just refused to see it. When I finally drove home, the weight of what I'd witnessed sat heavy on my chest. The house felt emptier than ever as I walked inside, the silence almost mocking me. I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock as the hours ticked by. She came home around midnight, slipping through the door quietly, as if she were trying not to wake me. "You're up late," she said, setting her purse down on the counter. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Couldn't sleep. How was your night?" "Good," she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "Just the usual, you know. Jenny and Lisa were hilarious, as always." She leaned over and kissed me on the forehead, her lips feeling like ice against my skin. "I'm going to bed. You should too." I watched her walk down the hallway, her figure disappearing into the shadows. The ache in my chest grew sharper, cutting deeper with every passing moment. I knew then that I couldn't let this go. Whatever she was hiding, I needed to uncover it. Megan had lied to me once, and I had no doubt she'd do it again. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her destroy everything we'd built without a fight. As I sat there, staring into the amber depths of my drink, a plan began to take shape in my mind. It was time to dig deeper, to find out just how far this betrayal went. The morning after Megan's late-night return, the house was eerily quiet. She moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened, humming to herself as she poured coffee into her favorite mug, the one I'd bought her on our first anniversary, with the words "World's Best Wife" printed in bold, cheerful letters. I couldn't look at it without feeling a pang of bitterness. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing my own coffee and pretending to scroll through emails on my phone. Inside, though, my mind was anything but calm. The image of Megan sitting across from that man in the restaurant haunted me. It was like a splinter I couldn't pull out, festering with every passing moment. "Megan," I said finally, my voice careful, casual. "What did you and Jenny talk about last night?" She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Oh, the usual," she said with a shrug. "Work stuff, catching up. You know how it is." My jaw tightened as I nodded. "Sounds fun." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was. "I think we all needed a night like that." I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to me. "You've been having a lot of those nights lately." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I'd struck a nerve. "Well, yeah. It's nice to get out with the girls every now and then. Is that a problem?" I shook my head, keeping my tone light. "Not at all. Just noticing, that's all." She didn't respond, instead focusing intently on her coffee as though it held the secrets of the universe. That evening, after Megan left for what she claimed was another errand, I decided it was time to dig deeper. I went back to her laptop, my hands trembling as I opened the lid. The guilt was still there, clawing at me, but I pushed it aside. I needed answers. This time, I checked her messages. Megan was meticulous, but not perfect. There were deleted texts in her conversation history with Jenny, gaps that didn't make sense. It was as though pieces of a puzzle were missing, carefully removed to keep me from seeing the full picture. I also noticed something strange in her emails. Most of them were work-related or mundane. Online shopping confirmations, newsletters she never read. But one email stood out, buried under a stack of other messages. It was a receipt for a reservation at the restaurant I'd seen her at the night before. The date matched, and so did the time. The reservation was for 2. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. She hadn't even tried to hide it. That realization sent a chill through me. Megan had always been careful about details. She'd remembered our anniversary every year, never missed a birthday or special occasion. But now, she was careless, like she didn't think I would ever question her. I closed the laptop and sat back, staring at the ceiling as a bitter thought crossed my mind. Megan wasn't just lying. She was growing comfortable with it. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet tension. I kept my distance, observing her more than engaging with her. Megan, for her part, seemed completely at ease. She laughed at her favorite TV shows, hummed to herself while doing laundry, and even suggested we go out for dinner that Friday. I wanted to scream at her, to confront her, to demand answers. But something held me back. I needed more. If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything. I wanted undeniable proof, something that would leave her no room to wriggle out of the truth. So I bided my time. On Friday night, I told Megan I was working late, though I had no intention of going anywhere near the office. I watched from the upstairs window as she left the house, dressed up again, her heels clicking against the driveway as she climbed into her car. Once she was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time, she drove to a different part of the city, a quiet, upscale neighborhood with tree-lined streets and sprawling homes. My heart pounded as I kept a safe distance, watching her car turn into the driveway of a house I didn't recognize. The lights were on inside, and through the large front window, I saw the silhouette of a man waiting by the door. Megan got out of the car, smoothing her dress as she approached the house. The man opened the door before she could knock, greeting her with a warm, familiar smile. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. The confirmation I had been dreading. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I drove home, my mind racing with anger, confusion, and a deep, suffocating sadness. By the time Megan returned, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. "Hey," she said softly, setting her purse on the counter. "You're up late again." I didn't look at her. "How was your night?" "Good," she said quickly, her voice a little too bright. "How was work?" I turned to face her, forcing a tight smile. "Productive." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Well, I'm exhausted. Heading to bed." I watched her disappear down the hallway, her figure swallowed by the shadows. My chest ached as I realized the truth. Whatever we had built together was already falling apart, and Megan didn't even seem to care. The cracks in our marriage were no longer small, hidden fissures. They were wide, gaping wounds, impossible to ignore. And I knew that sooner or later, everything would come crashing down. The tension in the house was palpable the next morning. Megan went about her usual routine as though nothing had changed, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table. I sat across from her, the weight of what I'd discovered crushing me. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the secrets, they were suffocating. My heart raced as I stared at her, trying to summon the courage to say the words that had been burning in my throat since last night. "Megan," I said finally, my voice low and steady. She looked up, her eyebrows knitting together in mild concern. "Yeah. Where were you last night?" Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Something too quick for most people to notice, but I saw it. "I told you," she said lightly. "I was out with Jenny and Lisa." "No, you weren't." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Megan froze, her mug halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully, her movements deliberate. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I saw you go to his house. I saw him open the door and let you in." For a moment, Megan just stared at me, her mouth slightly open as though she was about to speak but couldn't find the words. Then, slowly, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest. "You followed me?" she said, her tone incredulous. "Jack, what the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months, and you want to make this about me?" "I haven't been lying," she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending I don't know what's going on. I've seen the emails, Megan. I've read the messages. I know about the forums. And now I've seen you with him." Her face paled, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. "Jack, it's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I said, leaning forward. "Make me understand why the woman I've loved for 12 years would sneak around behind my back and then have the nerve to lie to my face about it." Megan's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt, shame, or anger. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said softly. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" I demanded. "You meeting another man? You starting a relationship with him while you're still married to me? Or you getting caught?" She flinched at the last part, and for a moment, she looked like she might crumble. But then she squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. "I never meant to hurt you, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You did." Megan buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, wanted to reach across the table and comfort her like I always had. But I couldn't. Not this time. "Why?" I asked quietly after a long silence. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was lonely, Jack. I felt like we were stuck in a rut, like we were just going through the motions. And then I met him, and he made me feel alive again." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So you decided the solution was to betray me?" "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said desperately. It got out of control." I shook my head, unable to process what she was saying. "When you brought up the open marriage, was that just a way to make this okay? To get me to go along with it so you wouldn't feel guilty?" She hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I can't do this, Megan. I can't live like this. Jack, please, she said, standing up and reaching for me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. I still love you. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. You don't cheat on someone you love, I said coldly. You don't lie to them, sneak around, and then come home and act like nothing's wrong. That's not love, Megan. That's selfishness. She broke down again, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't stay there and watch. I walked out of the kitchen, my mind racing. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Megan tried to talk to me several times, but I shut her out. I needed space, time to think. By the evening, I knew what I had to do. When she came into the living room, her eyes swollen and red, I didn't wait for her to speak. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice flat. Megan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jack? No. Please. We can fix this. Don't do this. But I had already made up my mind. The trust between us was gone, shattered beyond repair. And without trust, there was no marriage. I'm sorry, Megan, I said, standing up. But this is over. She sobbed as I walked away, her cries echoing through the house like a ghost of what we once were. That night, after Megan went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a lead blanket, suffocating and relentless. My mind was a storm of anger, sadness, and questions I couldn't answer. But beneath it all, there was something else, a quiet ache that I couldn't ignore. I missed her. Not the woman who had lied to me, who had sneaked around behind my back, but the Megan I had fallen in love with. The Megan who had once been my whole world. I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift back to a memory that had been etched into my soul. It was the summer of our 3rd anniversary, a trip to the Outer Banks. We had rented a tiny beach house, its faded blue shutters rattling in the ocean breeze. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. I could still see her standing on the balcony that first evening, barefoot in her sundress, the golden light of the sunset painting her skin. She had turned to me, her hair tousled by the wind, and smiled in that way that made the rest of the world disappear. Come here, she had said, her voice soft, almost playful. I joined her on the balcony, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore below. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pulled me close, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was as sweet as it was electrifying. That night, we had made love with the windows open, the salty breeze filling the room as the world outside faded away. Every touch, every whispered word, felt like a promise, a vow that nothing would ever come between us. I opened my eyes, the memory dissolving into the harsh reality of the present. The woman in that memory was a stranger to me now, her laughter replaced by lies, her touch by betrayal. But the ache remained, a hollow yearning for something I could never get back. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, I felt Megan stir beside me. She turned toward me, her hand brushing against my arm. Jack? She whispered, her voice tentative. I didn't respond, staring up at the ceiling. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. For everything. I never wanted to hurt you. Her hand moved to my chest, her touch hesitant, as though she was afraid I would push her away. Please, she murmured, her fingers tracing gentle circles against my skin. I still love you. I turned to face her, and in the dim light of the room, I could see the tears glistening in her eyes. She looked so vulnerable, so desperate, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the connection we once had. Megan leaned closer, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both familiar and foreign. Her touch was soft, her movements slow, as if she was trying to remind me of the love we had shared. But something was missing. Her kisses, once filled with passion and sincerity, now felt hollow. Her touch, once electric, now carried a weight that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't the same. And yet, I let her continue, my body responding out of habit, while my heart remained cold and distant. She whispered apologies against my skin, her tears mixing with the intimacy of the moment. I wanted to believe her, to lose myself in the fantasy that we could go back to the way things were. But the truth was inescapable. Even as we lay together, the space between us felt insurmountable. The memories of her betrayal lingered like shadows, darkening every touch, every whispered word. When it was over, Megan curled up beside me, her head resting on my chest. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said softly. "I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. Anything. Just don't leave me." I didn't respond, my hand idly running through her hair as I stared at the ceiling. She fell asleep eventually, her breathing slow and steady. But I lay awake, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Her plea was sincere, but it was too late. The intimacy we had just shared wasn't enough to erase what she had done. It wasn't enough to rebuild the trust she had destroyed. As I held her sleeping form, I realized something that cut deeper than anything else. I still loved her. But that love wasn't enough to save us. The woman in my arms wasn't the Megan I had married. And I wasn't the same man who had promised to love her forever. We were broken, and no amount of intimacy could piece us back together. The morning light crept into the room, soft and golden, painting everything in a deceptive warmth. Megan was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful in the way only sleep could bring. I watched her for a moment, my chest tightening with a mixture of love and resentment. I loved her, of that, I was certain, but love alone wasn't enough. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her, and went downstairs. The house was still and quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavier than usual. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. Megan's apologies from the night before echoed in my mind. Her desperation, her promises to change. It all swirled together in a confusing mess. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. But the other part of me, the part that had followed her to that man's house, knew the truth. Trust, once shattered, was impossible to repair. Megan came downstairs about an hour later, her hair a mess and her eyes still puffy from sleep. She hesitated in the doorway when she saw me sitting there, as if she was gauging my mood. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning." My voice was flat, distant. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around the mug of coffee I'd left out for her. "I meant what I said last night, Jack," she began, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I almost believed her. But then the memory of her sitting across from another man, laughing and smiling, came crashing back. "How long has it been going on?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Megan," I said, my tone sharper now. "How long have you been seeing him?" Her lips parted as if to deny it, but she stopped herself. She lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the mug. "A few months," she admitted quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I had already suspected it. Hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. "Was he the reason you brought up the open marriage?" I asked, my voice cold. Megan flinched, her shoulders hunching as if she were bracing for impact. "Yes," she whispered. I thought maybe if you agreed, it wouldn't feel so wrong." "Jesus, Megan," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "You didn't think to talk to me first? To tell me you were unhappy? Instead, you went behind my back and started something with someone else?" She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I was scared, Jack. Scared that you wouldn't understand. Scared of losing you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You managed to do both." The rest of the day passed in a blur of tense silence. Megan stayed in the bedroom while I paced the house, my mind racing. By evening, I had made my decision. She came downstairs when she heard me packing a bag. Her eyes were red and swollen, her expression panicked. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm leaving," I said simply. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "No, Jack, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." "I'll cut him off, I swear." I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. "It's too late for that, Megan. You should have thought about fixing things before you decided to cheat." Tears streamed down her face as she stepped closer, her hands reaching for me. Please, Jack, don't go. I love you. I took a deep breath, my chest aching with every word she spoke. I love you too, Megan, I said quietly, but I can't do this anymore. I can't live with someone I can't trust. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably as I walked to the door. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, before turning back to her. You made your choice, Megan, I said, my voice heavy with finality. Now I'm making mine. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the life we had built together. The drive to the hotel was a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Megan, about the woman I had loved for 12 years. The woman who had promised me forever and then shattered that promise into 1,000 pieces. As I pulled into the hotel parking lot and turned off the engine, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. This was it, the end of us. And yet, as painful as it was, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest felt just a little bit lighter. Megan had broken my heart, but she hadn't broken me. The days following my departure were a haze of paperwork, legal consultations, and quiet evenings alone in a small hotel room. The weight of what had happened hung heavy over me, but with each passing day, I felt a faint glimmer of something else, relief. Megan tried to reach out a few times. Texts, voicemails, even a long, tearful email where she apologized again and begged me to reconsider. I read it twice, every word dripping with remorse. But no matter how much I wanted to forgive her, the trust between us was gone. I didn't respond. By the end of the week, I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the alleyway behind a bakery. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that belonged only to me. Moving in was strangely cathartic. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and wood polish, the kind of clean slate I so desperately needed. I unpacked my things slowly, carefully, savoring the quiet as I placed books on shelves and hung a simple print of a mountain landscape on the wall. I kept very little from the life I'd shared with Megan. The photos, the mementos, they stayed in a box at the back of the closet, too painful to display but too meaningful to throw away. One evening, as I sat on the couch sipping a beer, the faint sound of music drifted in from the bakery below. It was cheerful, lively, the kind of tune that made you tap your foot without realizing it. For the first time in weeks, I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a smile. Life was still there, waiting for me. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Megan and I met briefly at the courthouse to sign the papers. She looked different, thinner, paler, her eyes shadowed with regret. She tried to talk to me afterward, but I couldn't bring myself to stay. Take care, Megan, I said quietly before walking away. The sound of her soft sobs followed me down the courthouse steps, but I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I began to find a rhythm in my new life. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering my love for the outdoors. I spent weekends exploring trails and mountains, letting the crisp air and the steady crunch of my boots against dirt clear my mind. One Saturday morning, I found myself at the peak of a small but challenging trail just outside the city. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills blanketed in green, a winding river cutting through the valley below. As I stood there, the weight I'd been carrying for months seemed to lift, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. One evening, I sat at a small coffee shop near my apartment, working on a crossword puzzle and sipping a latte. A woman at the next table glanced over and smiled. She had warm brown eyes and a shy, hesitant smile, the kind that made you feel instantly at ease. "Is that today's crossword?" she asked, gesturing toward my newspaper. I nodded. "Yeah, it's tougher than I expected." She laughed softly. "Mind if I help? I'm pretty good with crosswords." For the next hour, we worked on the puzzle together, exchanging guesses and laughing at our mistakes. Her name was Emily, and she worked as a graphic designer. She had a way of talking that made you forget about everything else, her voice calm and soothing. As I walked back to my apartment that night, I realized I was smiling again. It wasn't much, just a casual encounter with a stranger, but it felt like the start of something new. The pain of what Megan had done would always be a part of me, a scar I carried quietly. but it didn't define me anymore. The life I thought I'd lost wasn't gone. It was just different now. And as I stood in my tiny apartment, watching the city lights flicker outside the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.